Sure. Thank you, Chair. The meeting is now live.
Thank you very much, Lizzie, and good evening to all those people who've joined us, and those outside the council and also those online. And welcome to this edition of the Climate Change Panel. The usual protocols apply to everyone, so please turn your camera on when you're going to speak, and also please give me your name, and then please keep the mics off until you're speaking. So we'll just go through the usual kind of correspondence first. What's any apologies, please, Lizzie, for the meeting?
Yes, I've had apologies from councillors Mrs. Mackenzie Boyle, Mossam, Temperton and Turrell. I understand there are a few members who are struggling to access Zoom this evening as well. So
I'm also aware that Councillor Betterson cannot make this evening. He's spoken to me also.
Great, okay. Thank you very much.
That's noted. I think there's a problem with people trying to get on, but let's hope that people are joining us as we go along. I was going to say about the minutes. I don't think anybody I can see is on, but hi, Sandra. Welcome. Hi, Sandra.
Oh, hello. Sorry. Let me mute myself and things like that.
Okay.
We've had, because it's a new PC, had a bit of trouble getting on, but
no
we're
worries.
here now. So good. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I'll just bash on, Sandra. Okay, with the meeting. So we're just going through the minutes of the last meeting, and I wondered if anybody has anything to raise on it. I just have one thing actually, and it was just in the notes about the cycleways. We need clarifying. Kevin, did we think that someone was going to come back to us about that? It's really the north of the borough it affected.
Yes, Chair. A note was circulated to the panel. It was drafted by our Highways and Transport colleagues, and that was circulated along with the notes from my presentation, which covered a number of items that also were requested. So, yes, I think we can close that item.
Did we get any reference from Highways about it or not?
Chair, they did give quite a detailed note in terms of picking up the points put forward. Okay. So I don't think I could do it justice summarising it. I would refer members back to that written correspondence.
Thanks, Kevin.
Also, Chairman, it's Councillor Hayes here.
Yep.
I'll come up on screen. Like with page 3, long grass under trees and all that, there are papers coming. We are already dealing with that. Schools on the 6th of May. I want to say that they're getting involved in different other things that we are doing. The PPP and recycling and Askerteeth schools and that. It's something we are doing a lot of it. I'm really impressed by how much we've taken on under the climate change.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. So if there's no other comments on the notes, let me get on to tonight's meeting.
I just bring up, when we were setting the agenda settings, and this is no offence to other persons that are going to be joining us and speaking, but when we set an agenda setting, can we just keep to not have extras put in at the end without some of us knowing about it? Because
I don't know what you mean, Councillor Hayes, because at the agenda setting of which I was chairing, every person on that was discussed, including the last person.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, let's get a record of that and we can show it to you. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks very much. But thanks for the comment.
I would appreciate it.
Thanks for the comment. Okay, let's get on tonight's meeting, really, which I think is all about biodiversity, which is a very interesting subject, I'm sure. And just to go through the speakers before we go to them, we're very delighted to have Matthew Stanton from the Berks, Bucks and Oxon Wildlife Trust, Stephen Chow, who's our own Bracknell Head of Natural Estates, And from the Crown Estate, we have Des Sussex, who's probably he's been into Bracknell before, so we welcome Des. And very lastly, we have Sheila Collins, who's representing the Warfield Environment Group. Now, before we get started, there's a couple of things that I was interested in. I don't know if anyone noticed, but there was a Earth Day, which was on the 22nd of April. The only reason I knew that is because I listened to Monty Don on Gardeners, and he said it. Maybe there's too many days like that, but anyway, that's one point. But something else that I happened to pick up, which I think is quite relevant, and I wonder, Lizzie, if you could put that on the screen for everyone. And I saw the atmospheric methane record, which hit an all-time record last year, which is, I think, quite alarming. So that's one for us all to think about and understand. Anyway, one other fact before I hand this over to our first speaker, I just noticed that one mature tree produces as much oxygen in a season as 10 people inhale in a year. You know, it's an interesting point. So with that thought, let me just introduce Matthew Stanton from the Berks, Bucks and Oxon Wildlife Trust. Matthew, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Sorry I was late joining. I've been sat here screaming at my computer for the last 20 minutes to properly load up.
Join my life, actually.
Well, that is one of the downsides of working for a charity. Our IT equipment is absolutely appalling, but never mind. We're good at the stuff on the ground.
Don't worry. We're all the same. Don't worry. Anyway, welcome.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Right. Hopefully you can see that.
You can see that. So,
great. I'm just going to talk to you a bit, and I will make sure I stick to time, about Berks Oxon Wildlife Trust's current strategy, how it interacts with climate change, and also how we see Be About and local authorities being able to work together, as well as with the landowners as well. So we know we're lucky to live and work in a beautiful part of the country. But at Be About, we think we need to start thinking sort of bigger, bolder and wilder. And that's why that's the title of our new strategy. We know that sort of current conservation practices, quite frankly, haven't been working. We know wildlife is in free fall. There's been a 68% decline since 1970. So looking at the state of nature today, we know it's pretty dire. So we need to change our approach. We also know that our climate is in crisis. There are hotter summers, wetter winters, and we're reaching a tipping point where nature can't cope, and neither can we. Part of the causes of that is that our wild space is becoming more and more fragmented, and wildlife is getting slowly squeezed out, and people are at risk of being cut off from nature as well. So one of the big sort of themes that we're working on is connectivity, but it's both connectivity for habitats, so they can be more resilient to climate change, but also connectivity for people, so they feel more connected to the natural world as well. But we know there are some huge positives that we can take from what's been going in the past. We've seen a huge shift in awareness of environmental issues. The government's now talking about green recovery, and the Environment Act, that I'll come on to a bit more, presents new opportunities to reconnect people with nature. We know that COVID-19 has brought the connection between people and nature closer together. People are more aware of the importance of nature. And we know that people want that connection because people's mental health suffered in some ways to the pandemic, but we know that people really found sort of solace and support from being out in nature. But that brings pressures as well. The more people that want to go out into nature means essentially the better managed it needs to be, and the more of it we need to have. So this is part of our vision here. The government's ambition is for sort of 30% of land to be well managed for nature by 2030, and that's our vision as well. Our way we define that sort of 30% is slightly different, but we do support the general aims. So we want to see 30% of land well managed for nature by 2030. And within Be About, we've created a new nature recovery network. which will help us achieve that vision as it maps joined up areas across our 3 counties that are important for wildlife. And it'll help guide our sort of internal efforts to restore and protect nature. So our mission is to bring about nature recovery through local action. And a key part of that is obviously to put nature into recovery. And to do that, we need to empower people to act for nature as well. So point 1, if we're going to put nature into recovery, we not only need to buy more land for nature ourselves and make sure our own sites are havens for wildlife, but we also want to think bigger and past our own nature reserves and out into the wider landscape. And we're going to use a nature recovery network map that I'll show you in a bit to create bigger, wilder, more connected landscapes where wildlife can thrive, can bring people closer to nature. So it's about working with more partners across the county, not just working on our own reserves. And this is a sort of very high level example of what the Nature Recovery Network roughly looks like. So you can see there are dark areas that are really key for wildlife. There's the lighter green ones where we want to introduce greater connectivity, and the orange ones as well, which show we think are the best opportunities to connect habitats together to make them more resilient to climate change. So this represents a bit of a change of approach, really. So the traditional approach to habitat management aims to get one patch into a really good condition through appropriate management, maybe expanding it into a neighbouring area as well, or contributing to a biodiversity action plan. So it benefits wildlife in that area, but it's not really succeeded in the past to really changing how nature can recover. It preserves small oases of wildlife-rich land, but these are sort of isolated, and that's not going to bring about nature recovery in the way that we need going forward, given the new pressures that we have. So a way to deal with it is the Nature Recovery Network. So it's an ecological network that promotes connectivity. It's being developed using environmental data as well as our own priorities, and it identifies the areas that are most important for nature and that we should be focusing on to protect. So this is an internal BBOUT strategic decision support tool, really. But because we've gone through this process to work out this map of where we need better connectivity, it means we're well placed to support local planning authorities with the local nature recovery strategies that are going to be coming in the Environment Act. So a tiny bit on sort of the science behind nature recovery networks. One big part of them is about climate change adaptation. So we know that natural systems need to be increased to absorb carbon and respond to climate change. We know that temperature rises means the range of species is going to shift. So we need that connectivity to enable species to be able to move through these wildlife corridors. But it's also important because the impacts of climate change, so flooding, pollution, temperature extremes, by ensuring that nature can deal with the pressures of climate change, we actually can use nature to support ourselves as well in flooding mitigation, as well as other sort of nature-based solutions that help people as well as the natural environment. So again, this is sort of the rough map that I've just explained, but it's not just about nature itself per se, it's also about people. So we want to make sure that we empower people to act for nature. And that's why we're identifying some key sort of urban areas where we're going to be focusing on our community engagement and education work over the next 5 years. The areas displayed in blue, you'll see there's Bracknell, Slough, Maidenhead, Reading are in there. And as I said before, this is closely linked to the local nature recovery strategies that are coming in the, well, arrived, I suppose, in the Environment Act. These are landscape scale strategies that connect existing wildlife protected sites to areas for natural restoration. We're expecting them to be at a county level, with one local planning authority being the lead. These local nature recovery strategies will include statement of biodiversity priorities for the area and a habitat map of the whole area as well, which will sort of show the habitats that are there, but also opportunities where we think will be best placed to increase connectivity and where we can really deliver for nature. So the obligation is given the local authorities. At the Wildlife Trust, we really want to help and support local authorities in coming up with their local nature recovery strategies. We were heavily involved in Buckinghamshire when they were doing their pilot project with DEFRA for local nature coverage strategy. And because it is something that deals with the whole county, it's not just sort of the local authorities have to do it, it should be all stakeholders as well. There's a huge element of stakeholder consultation that needs to be done to ensure that everyone is involved, to ensure it meets the criteria that DEFRA is requiring for consultation. And local nature partnership in Berkshire can play a really key role in that. The local nature partnership is currently being refreshed, so it has more membership, better resources. And if it is adequately resourced, the local nature partnership can really help support the local authorities in developing the local nature coverage strategy, because the people on it are sort of the experts in the area as well. And it can also help with that, dealing with the stakeholder exercise. So back talking about Be About again, what we've been doing. So some examples of projects that are good for wildlife, good for tackling climate change, and good for people. One of them is our Wild Verges project. So that's a 3-year partnership with West Berkshire, where we're creating a network of wildlife-friendly corridors along roadsides. We work with volunteers to survey verges within, I think, 1,700 kilometres of council road network there. So we're advising on habitat management plans. And that's a way of, again, enabling particularly pollinators as well, creating more space for them. So they are both more resilient to climate change as well. And everyone loves to see nice wildflowers on the road verges as well. Something else we're doing is our Meadows for Climate initiative. This is something we're doing with Ecova and Open University's Floodplain Meadows Partnership. So this is a project focused on demonstrating the ecological and climate benefits of restoring floodplain meadows. Another thing we've got is also the Wildlife Trust Habitat Banking Investment Model, which is a project closely linked to biodiversity net gain that you might know is coming down the track as well. So all developments will have to deliver biodiversity net gain. And if they can't deliver it on site, they need to deliver it off site, and they can pay essentially to have it delivered off site. So this is a way of potentially pooling those funds from different developments to create some really stellar big areas for wildlife, particularly focusing on nature-based solutions to tackle climate change and flood alleviation, etc. And then again, just to touch on the last point, because we really do Be About, in sort of People Power is quite a small organisation in terms of staff, but we have thousands of volunteers, thousands of members. So we've got a really good reach out into communities. And we really want to increase that impact as well. So we want everyone to be inspired to act for nature, everyone to be inspired to tackle climate change. So that's really key to our strategy as well. That was a very sort of quick flying through some of the main concepts. But essentially, I think the thing to take from this is one of the big opportunities coming down the track is those local nature coverage strategies I mentioned. And if we can really get wide stakeholder engagement and involvement in it, not only does that mean the plan and the strategy is really well informed, it means if more people are feeding into it, more people feel invested in it, and more people feel invested in actually delivering it as well. And that's going to be key if it is going to help tackle the nature and climate crisis. So that is me, and I hope that was under 10 minutes.
I think that's exceptional, Matthew. You did it in about 8 minutes. That's brilliant.
Excellent.
Can I ask you a couple of questions? I think
Yes,
other
of
members
course.
might want to, but the first thing I was going to ask you is about drought conditions. Are you now thinking that our weather system, we did a climate change thing a bit earlier, and Reading University seemed to say that we will get periods of really heavy rain and then periods of no rain. How does that affect everything?
Well, in terms of our own sites and habitats, we're essentially trying to make our sites as resilient to climate change as possible. And what we've done to do that is we've done an audit of our sites to see how our own management practices are going to have to change in the next 5 to 10 years to ensure there are still good habitats there. We've had to ask ourselves some quite tricky questions, really, with some of our sites that we might manage now for a specific habitat. But if we know in 10 years' time, 15, 20, so that's not going to be feasible for the climate we're going to have, we're having to now say to ourselves, it's quite a philosophical point of, are we trying to maintain things as they are now, or are we trying to make things be able to adapt? So it might be new habitat we're protecting in the future for new species and new wildlife. And when you talk about sort of conservation, people often think it's trying to sort of keep things as they are, make sure nothing ever changes, keep that site as it is. So we're having to ask ourselves now, have we got to reassess that? Have we got to change what our vision is like for the future as to what our countryside is going to look like? And yeah, in terms of increased rainfall, increased droughts, part of our work in some areas is looking at opening up floodplain meadows, because we have sites that flood a lot now and can have really dry spells as well. So it's looking how we change our management practices to make sure that we enable rivers to flood where they need to, but in a safe way that isn't near houses and people. And you might be aware that in the centre of Oxford now, they're looking at Oxford's flood alleviation scheme, which is a massive project to deal with sort of increased flooding events. So it's behind a very, very long-term vision and not being too wedded to what you think countryside should look like.
All right, thanks. I'm going to open up to members, Matthew. So first is Councillor Ingham. Sandra.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And Matthew, thank you for your presentation. Are you hearing me okay? I've got a new PC, so
Yeah, we can hear you.
yeah, oh, good. All right.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you, reference the map in the middle of the presentation, and which showed Bracknell Forest, and it showed sort of green and orange. So my question was, have you got specific aspirations for our borough? I mean, you've given us examples of projects that have happened with the Wilder Verges and the meadow creation, but you know, as a wildlife trust, do you have, I mean, are you expecting the council to lead on everything, or do you have aspirations for us?
Well, so firstly, on the map, I can send you a link, like I said to Stephen, he can share it, which enables you to zoom down into the areas where we think the greatest potential is for greater connectivity. In terms of leading on things, it's not that we have sort of specific aspirations, specific projects we want in various places, but we have got sort of suite of projects that we know work. And if there's the enthusiasm in your council to work with us on those, then we'll be happy to work with you on it. For us, it's all about sort of partnership work. So it's not about us doing things on our own. It's not about us telling you what we think you should do. It's about us sort of showing what can be done, you seeing what thing works in your area, or what your ambitions are to tackle climate change or something, and then us working together to develop a project maybe. But we've certainly got sort of examples of things that have worked elsewhere that we can share, and then, as I say, see what you think would work for you, and then develop a project together.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Thank you. Look forward to working with you then.
And I'm very jealous of your new computer.
Oh, well, having a few little teething problems, but anyway,
you all are. Thanks, Sandra. Councillor Leake, Ian Leake.
Thank you, Tony, and again, thank you, Matthew. Matthew, I doubt that anybody is going to seriously disagree with anything that you've said, and I think most of us would wish you had a more forceful presence, shall we say, in some areas. There isn't an easy answer to my question, although I have to say it's probably, I'm phrasing it more as a comment. One of the problems that we have, of course, is particularly in the rural and the semi-rural areas of our borough, which are mainly contained within what we call our northern parishes, we're getting knocked off by developers picking on small sites, anything between, shall we say, 5, 15, 20 houses. And when we raise the issue of this sort of wildlife, issue, there's always the response, well, I can't say always, but 99% of the time, there's the response, oh, well, there's plenty of other places for them to go, and they aren't particularly rare or protected, and all that sort of thing. I'm sure you've heard it all before. I mean, and it's very, very difficult to get an answer to this. Would you have any comment or advice on what I have just said?
I think my main comments on working with developers and sort of small sites like that is, well, firstly, anything you can put in your local policies that means they have to respect wildlife a bit more is obviously good. And I think the whole attitude of, well, they can go elsewhere is very outdated, because it's no longer the case that we should only expect massive developments to provide for wildlife as well. Even on small developments, there's got to be that connectivity. Developments have to be designed with nature in mind as well, not just people. So they shouldn't be sort of massive tarmac areas anymore. They should have habitats within them. So yeah, I think your local policies, if you want to make life as difficult as possible for those people who don't necessarily support wildlife.
Yeah, I understand that, and you know, I suppose internally, like many other authorities, you know, we've had that argument. Most of us who've had anything to do with planning and have sat on planning committees know that there's only one rule in planning, and that is, if you have a policy that says you can't do something, there is another policy somewhere that says, well, actually you can if, and vice versa applies as well. And, you know, there's always this business, well, you know, we can build tunnels, we can lift the buildings, we can move them somewhere else, we can do something with the groundwater, we can make a pond and overflow, and all that is right, but it's actually destroying what is actually there, and it's altering the relative balance of that to wherever that particular location is, and its other locations. I know there isn't an easy answer, but I suppose what I'm saying is, I think there are some of us that would hope that organisations like yours would find an answer to that.
Well, so we have a planning team, obviously, who object to developments where we think they do significant harm that should involve us. I suppose one thing to consider is, I mentioned biodiversity net gain, it's coming down the track, and there is the risk that such small developments will just pay for biodiversity units, which means that the damage they've done can be offset somewhere else. So I suppose I'd probably urge you as council to look at that and have your own strategy as to how you think funds that were generated through biodiversity net gain should be spent. And if you want to make sure that the local area where developments happen receive the benefits of that and are protected, make sure that's sort of your policy and your approach. Because there is a concern, biodiversity net gain would generally be a good thing, there is a concern that it will mean damage will be done in one area and compensated elsewhere. But it's really important to make sure that your own approach is clear, that where damage is done to an area, the benefits must be felt in the same area.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Ian. It all goes down, Matthew, to local policies and members getting involved, isn't it?
Yeah.
Making sure they are correct.
Yeah.
Thanks. Michael Gallibo, please. Michael.
Hi, Matthew. Good afternoon, or good evening, should I say. Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned earlier on in your presentation that you're now adopting a new model, moving away from the sort of approach of having an island of biodiversity. And that to me sounded like a fantastic approach. But then down the line, at the end of your presentation, you spoke about development or developers having to mitigate by money, by paying if they cannot provide a meadow, for example. I mean, is that wise? Surely we should, and because the whole concept here, my understanding tonight is that you're trying to bring nature back and connect with people. So if we're now talking about going back to creating those islands, it just makes it a little bit easier for developers to just give you the money and say, go and find the land somewhere. and provided elsewhere?
So on the biodiversity net gain point I was talking about, so that's in the Environment Act now. And this is what I was also talking about with local nature coverage strategy and connectivity. We obviously want, when new developments happen, and first I'll just say the biodiversity net gain requirements, where they need to buy credits to make sure they do good, is on top of existing planning restrictions and conditions. So it's in no way weakening what we already have. But that's what I mean by you need to have your sort of local strategy as well. If a development is happening, you obviously want to make sure that development is as wildlife friendly as possible. If there's still damage going to be done and they have to offset their damage elsewhere, then you need to make sure you have a strategy where you think that those offsets should be done. And to link that back to the Nature Crew network I was talking about, if you've got two great habitats here, and you have got some funds from biodiversity net gain to restore nature somewhere, don't do an island somewhere, use it to try and link these up. And that's how you make your network. So it's about sort of the strategic use of new funds that are coming down the track through biodiversity net gain. And just to say, sorry, quickly, my neighbours look after my children at the moment. So I need to go and put them to bed very soon, but I've got time for another quick question.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Hold on, sorry, I haven't got my
It's a
video on.
very quick,
You're happy with that, Michael? Okay.
because Matthew's going off.
Councillor
Yeah,
Hay.
sorry, it's because I just want to ensure that somebody else has a go before Matthew needs to, because I think he needs to go.
Yes, that's what I was just going to say. It was something very quickly. Matthew, thank you for Councillor Mrs. Hayes. You can appreciate I've always been involved with the environment and what we're doing, especially with planning. And particularly you, and I do appreciate that you gave your papers in advance so we could see them. Are you aware that the senior parts of the schools have these environmental groups called Green Minds and Green Lives? We should have been having a meeting on the 6th of May. Unfortunately, Chris Packham, believe it or not, can't make it. So it's going to, but Billy, I will be coming back to you, young man, to join us at some stage, because the young persons, they are the future.
Absolutely. So that Green Minds and Green Lives, do you say?
Yes.
Okay, I've not heard of that before.
You
And that's
like
what-
it?
Yeah, the local schools.
Yes. And these are the working groups for the environment in each of the senior schools. And they're looking at it not only on planning, because we have to look at where we live, how we develop, and planning policies. It's not a minute, oh, not in my area, because we wouldn't have had Martin's Heron, Forest Park, and the Warren, which was once a farm and didn't have anything given to us. So we have to look at it from the young minds and the green lives that they're doing.
Well, we've obviously got education and community teams and everything as well. So if you want to put me in touch with them, I'm sure we can.
Yes, I will. And I will be there for it, because it is, at the end of the day, not in my backyard, but we have to look at where we are going to plan and policy. It's not in our backyard. But I thank you in advance. Paperwork I will be sending round the young persons of senior schools. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Matthew, thanks for your time, and thanks for your giving us a fair brief through. So we'll see you again, I hope, sometime.
Yeah, anytime. Yes, no problem.
All right.
Thank you very much, all.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Okay, ladies and gents, we're now moving on to our own, actually, head of Natural Estates, Stephen Chow, and welcome, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good to be here.
It's all yours.
Lovely. Well, I think Lizzie agreed to help me share the slides, just so I can focus on the talking. And I think what's lovely is I'm able to build on the shoulders of giants in terms of the work that's gone before and gone with other partners. So it's great having Matthew doing the introduction. I think some of us as speakers had a fear that we were all going to try and say the same things with slightly different words. So it's quite useful for me. I'm going to try and edit a little bit what I talk to on the fly to pick up some of those important issues that came up with Matthew and in the conversations.
Stephen, I'm really sorry. I don't think I have your slides in front of me right now. They might be in my inbox.
Okay.
Would you mind quickly carrying them across? Is that okay?
Yeah, let me
have a dig round as well.
I'll see if I can share. I've just not shared on Zoom before, but that should be fine, I'm sure.
Good luck with that, Stephen.
We'll give it a go.
Yep, something's come up. Yes, brilliant.
Okay, let me just put that in present. How are we doing there?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, lovely. So yes, so Stephen Chown, Head of Natural Estates. I'm going to try and incorporate some of those questions because things that I was going to talk about then have been covered very eloquently by Matthew, and it doesn't warrant, when you've only got 10 minutes to work with, repeating too much. But we're all understanding that we are in a state of a biodiversity crisis. Whilst there's pockets of improvements, then we very much have an issue to address, and nature is in decline. The State of Nature report covers from 1970 onwards. It's really interesting reading. And I think what I'm going to try and explain is just that there's various different reasons for why we've got a decline in the diversity of our species. And I realise I haven't actually defined, none of us have defined biodiversity, but essentially it's anything you can put a species name to is part of the biodiversity of an area. And the more different species you have working in harmony together, then the greater the biodiversity of that area. And the reason that we've had so much change recently, it does tie to climate change. As Matthew said, nature is much more exposed to small changes in water, in seasonality, than we are in our homes. So it is important to just understand that nature will have an adjustment to make, and everything we do to try and combat climate change will help and will have a dividend for helping biodiversity. And a lot of the areas that you can see on this slide, things like the intensification of farming, the management of freshwater, fisheries, they're very important issues, but they're perhaps not where our efforts need to be focused on behalf of the council. But there's other areas where there are some really important strides that we can make and some really important work that we're doing. I'll highlight invasive non-native species. In terms of rhododendron, things like muntjac deer, everyone knows about grey squirrels, signal crayfish in our rivers. There's a variety of really important issues that we will need to be tackling. Woodland management is another really important one because it's often misunderstood that for biodiversity to thrive in a woodland, that you need to leave that woodland alone. And actually the crisis that we're facing from a biodiversity point of view in terms of our woodlands is a lack of management. And we've got that within our tree strategy, that we need to have a very active management approach to try and encourage, in whatever way we can, woodland works to proactively be done, because that's the thing that actually creates changes in habitats, different environments within that woodland that different species can use to thrive and move forward. Pollution, I think, is an important issue, but not something for a local level. And urbanisation as a reason for a change in diversity is a really important one for the borough to focus on, because it picks up on a theme that Matthew was talking about, connectivity, and making sure that we don't have islands and pockets of greenery, that we need to try and design our urban environment and modify our urban environment to make sure we're providing connection. And that's connection for wildlife and connection for people to be travelling and using wildlife because of the benefits that come. And we're not doing this just for its own sake. Wildlife and biodiversity pays us back many-fold for the improvements that we can bring. I haven't got the time to talk through all of these things, but from a human perspective, physical and mental health is enhanced hugely by contact with nature and spending time in open spaces. So that's a really important and powerful benefit that has multiple dividends further down the line. We get the benefits of flood control. We can grow food locally. We'll get cleaner water. We'll be producing more soil for the future. all of these things are ecosystem services that help us with our adaptation to climate change. And I think it's important that biodiversity must be understood that it helps us not just to mitigate climate change, but also to adapt to it. So we're making ground in terms of the future benefits, but also adjusting to what's going on right now. So I wanted to touch briefly on what the council's actually doing. We have a statutory duty to focus on biodiversity and have due regard to it with everything that we do. And that covers managing all of our services, educating the community. I think this meeting tonight really highlights how the council has a role to bring different parties together, because we can't solve all of the problems ourselves. We are working and have always worked really actively in partnership with other bodies, and that will continue to be the backbone of how we look to work in the future. In terms of how we actually organise our work, then we have a biodiversity action plan. It's in its second or third iteration. Forgive me, I can't remember. This one covers 2018 to 2023. We've done a midterm review in 2020. There's some really good key themes there that bring to a local level all of the wider aspirations that are talked about, and really drills down to 84 targets over 6 years that we're looking to achieve. Before I go too far, then I would like to say that that's very much a partnership piece of work. So there's a local nature partnership that brings together all interested local bodies, and we work collaboratively on that. In terms of the progress that's been made, I haven't got the time really to take you through in too much detail, but there's a huge amount of wildflower meadows that have been created. There's some amazing work being done to record our veteran trees so they can be properly understood and mapped and factored around. We're creating new hedgerows, we're creating new ponds, and we're also doing that important work of restoring existing ponds and surveying to just understand what we've got. And volunteer hours are a really important measure for us. It's important to recognise that that 7,000 volunteer hours even factors in the fact that COVID massively affected how much work we could do. So it would normally be much more. In terms of what people expect to see, I think commonly in terms of taking action on climate change, people want to see trees in the ground. Picking up on that point that was raised by the chairman earlier, then we are facing a situation where there's going to be periods of flood and periods of drought in future. And I'm keen to stress how easy it is, relatively speaking, to plant a tree, and how hard it is, relatively speaking, to have that tree still with us and healthy 3 years to 5 years later. So whenever we're considering tree planting, we have to make sure that the trees are in the right place, that the trees have got the required aftercare to see them through that infant period. And the beauty of it is, once that tree is independent in the landscape, it will have the best opportunity to survive for itself periods of drought or periods of flood. And established trees are really quite tolerant. I think in terms of what we might have to do to adapt in the future, then the species that we select to plant will need to take account of what species are best at surviving flood and drought situations. But the general principle of needing to plant as many trees and keep them well looked after until they're established is an important part of our work. Grassland cutting regimes, I'm treading on the toes slightly of colleagues in the landscape maintenance, sort of grounds maintenance area, who are doing some amazing work to pick up on some of the themes that we've been talking about with BBOUT and the project that Matthew talked about, where he was talking about roadside verges. We're looking to understand and learn all the time about how the competing demands of maintaining a safe highway verge can be matched to the desire to have as biodiverse an environment as possible. And it's a really exciting and interesting area that there are lots of initiatives that we can look to implement in the future. On an aside, we will be doing new signage. So if people are familiar with the butterflies that would indicate where we're deliberately and by design leaving things long, then those will get replaced by a new bumblebee logo. That's another collaboration within the council going forward. I was keen to try and give a few examples of what this looks like on the ground. So we took some Section 106 developer money 5 years ago, and then Bluebell Hill was for years and years, decades, kept as short mown grass. And we did some simple planting projects. We completely redid the planting in that area. It looked quite bald for a long time, but now we've got a really well established meadow in that area, and we've got some amazing plant species now being recorded. I touched on it briefly. The aim for woodlands is really to actively manage them. In addition to understanding and mapping what we've got, the main work needs to be removing invasive vegetation, and rhododendron is our arch enemy when it comes to woodland. It smothers and suffocates a huge amount of wildlife in our forests, and we can see the difference in an incredible way when we actually start getting that diversity of habitat within the forest. It can look quite drastic in its early stages. And this is an example from Long Hill Park, where we went quite industrial in terms of the machinery that we used. And we did some intensive clearance of rhododendron, and we got some fantastic results in terms of the regrowth. Matthew touched on some of these, so I will pick up on biodiversity net gain, I think, and connectivity, and the nature recovery network as we go along. But planning and planning policies are inextricably linked to the work that will be done on biodiversity. It will be important not to confuse whether housing should or shouldn't go in a particular area, because generally the species diversity and the presence of particular species in the area won't be a deciding material factor in whether development happens or not, or whether it happens in that site or not. But once we've established that development might be happening in an area of the borough, at that point we need to be very sure that all of our policies are geared up to make sure that we maximise the retention of wildlife on the site, and also the delivery of a really effective 10% additional works elsewhere mitigation. And there are a couple of points that I can hopefully quickly pick up on in that area, in that the council's work is ongoing to produce our own green infrastructure plan. We are producing our own maps of the borough to identify where we think that these kinds of enhancements funded by development can most usefully go, in order to make sure that we connect up green spaces effectively, as we aim to do. So there's very much a pyramid of mitigation. I know that there's a fear that when a development happens, all wildlife will be lost on that site. But within the planning process, there's a pyramid where the expectation is that biodiversity is understood and preserved wherever possible in that development on that site. And it's only after those measures have been shown to be not possible that it becomes eligible to then mitigate off-site. But we are already working with BBOUT. We're already talking with other local authorities. There was a question about the map that BBOUT produced, which showed the patchwork of sort of habitats and the islands versus the connectivity. We will be producing our own borough version of that map that will have the local detail that's drawn from our own sources that will mesh in with that, or will be the definitive map that we will work to. So just to reassure that that's a really important concept. We will be mapping the habitats. We work extensively with an organisation called TVERC, who are a records retaining company, and we will be producing those maps. And the aim, as we were talking about, is to make connections. So we will be proactively finding the schemes and the projects and the improvements that we can make to help biodiversity be connected within the borough, and we will have control of that process. And those discussions will come in the future as to how we can engage with local groups, how we can engage with the public, how we engage with members to make sure that we're making the best use of local knowledge as to where people would like to see those connections made. Another area that's quite exciting for the future to help us understand climate impact and generate resources is measurement of natural capital. So there are emerging processes for how you can map the biodiversity that you have, and then use formula and defensible methods to actually try and equate how much that would have as a monetary value. It's early days. We're excited to explore that in the future with various partners. So to conclude, because I must be over time, the key message for me is that biodiversity and climate change, they're just inextricably linked. The more that we can do to benefit biodiversity, the greater the benefits we have to mitigate and adapt for climate change in the future. And investment and benefit in one area improves the other area. If we can address climate change locally, we'll benefit biodiversity and vice versa. And fundamentally, we're just trying to become more resilient to change, adapt and store carbon, cool urban areas. And the human one is a really big one for me, because under the COVID experience that we've all had in recent years, people's mental and physical well-being is paramount. And it was a very clear message that came through that escaping to natural spaces and being connected to biodiversity is a really powerful force for good. So we will look to do everything we can in the most connected way possible. Many thanks.
Stephen, very well done. Brilliant. And very comprehensive, work through that. So thank you very much. One thing I'd just like to start, unless people have got questions, how can the residents really get involved in this? Because I think there's got to be a connection with the residents and what you're doing, because what you're doing is brilliant. The Bluebell Wood is fantastic. So well done on that. And well done to the team as well, because I know you don't have the biggest team in the world, do you?
Well, relatively speaking, I think we're lucky. There's lots of authorities with much smaller teams. So I would never sniff at the resources we have. Given the value of the work we try and do, then yes, you can never have a team that's too big. But it's a really important point, connecting with local residents. And we try to be sensitive that it's difficult to get a consensus of opinion. So the reality of some of these projects is that we don't please everyone all the time when we do them. And there's always different opinions, even about something as simple as rhododendron. We get some very passionate supporters of rhododendron, and equally, we feel the woodlands are better without rhododendron in general cases. But I think we would be keen to offer residents as much practical choice as we possibly can, and consult as much as we possibly can to make sure that schemes have that community backing. And that was why we're so excited to work with organisations like BBOUT, and why we, in delivering our biodiversity action plan, we connect with the local wildlife groups, because we need to make sure that we're bringing that local knowledge and local passion forward with us, and try and coordinate as much as we can and collaborate, because the council can't do it all on our own.
And that's the point. The council can't do it all on their own. And I think people really want to get involved. And I know there's been wildflower seeding. I've taken part in that, but lots of people have. And we want to see this a very green borough. Sandra, come into the discussion.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for everything that you do and your team as well. I just wanted to take this opportunity just to say, of course, as a local councillor, in fact, I'm almost certain that all local councillors are your greatest advocates locally. You know, what your team are doing locally, we're always pleased to promote and share. And it would be really helpful for us as councillors to have really regular, ongoing, short communications from you as to where your people are and what they're doing, so that we can, because, you know, I mean, if I'm out and about in my ward, I take my iPhone and I take photos like, oh, look what's happened today. And I'm thinking, actually, I should know this. But I don't get the advance alerts. I just wondered if that's something we could improve on.
I think that's a really good point. Yes, thank you, Councillor Ingham. I'm really happy to do that. One of the things I can offer immediately is the teams of rangers that we have are organised by area generally. We try and stop them having to drive from one end of the borough to the other. So essentially, I could assign each ward councillor or each ward with their local ranger. And if I was to facilitate that communication and that contact and relationship being stronger, then we could do little tours for you, or we can make sure that the rangers who are doing the projects keep you updated in a live way with what's happening. So I can certainly work to try and implement that and make sure that you're yeah, kept appraised of everything that's happening. We do try and share our positive stories with the social media. Well, we share them with the communications team of the council. They put them out on social media, and we do the newsletters regularly, which are really widely read within the borough. So there's the more formal side of things. We're always putting those stories out, but I'm really happy to try and make it more of an organic connection at a local level, ward by ward, if that's helpful.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Sandra, very much. Welcome to Mary Temperton. It's your line, Mary.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was late, but can I ask if you ever revisit, or when you revisit, the areas that you've changed, because you did a superb job. I loved it on the top of Wooden Hill, but then City Fibre came along and they destroyed the work you've done. And so it's all the locals took a lot of effort to say what's happening, and then they found out and they were celebrating, but now they're saying look at the mess, but it is appreciated. The bat boxes along Crowthorne Road are appreciated. Everything's doing well, but as Councillor Ingham says, having more information so that you can say when this will be repaired, or if City Fibre, I mean, I said to the man he had to come back with some wildflower seeds, because look what he's done. He hasn't been back. So do you come back? What happens, please?
Lovely. So I think what we're talking about is probably straddling the line between specific enhancements projects that have a start, finish, a delivery and an end date. And then what happens is those enhancements in the wider area, then they revert to essentially fairly normal management processes. So it is a loophole that I am happy to take on board. And, that's a really important point, that if something does happen to an enhancement project that's related to that project, even if the project's formally closed, then we need to make sure we've got a way to get back in there and just pick it up, because it might be something that, in the case of that specialist seed, it's just going to be outside the statutory obligations of a utilities undertaker. They have a duty to make good, put soil down and reseed it with grass. That's all we can, as a statutory measure, enforce that they do. We might be able to appeal to their better nature and get them to do a bit more. And generally all of the duties for biodiversity that apply to the council also apply actually to them as public bodies. So we can try and do that, but I think there might be an element of just needing to keep track of our projects and not let them fully close, to make sure we can still pick up those issues. And I'm happy to follow that one up, but I think we might need to just reseed that area ourselves, because it's too specialist an enhancement to expect a utility company to go back and fix for us.
It's not all. Some of it is still lovely, but there is then all of a sudden it ends. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think Councillor Virgo might have dropped out.
Yeah, I think. I don't know
Sorry.
whether I'm the last man standing or whether everyone else is still here.
I'm
Oh no,
here.
Tony's back.
Crikey.
You're still there, Tony.
What is happening to this internet today? Nothing.
Oh, baby, let's just, as long as we're above ground and alive and we can all work together, and we're doing biodiversity.
Bash on. Oh, just a quickie, because we move on. I know there's a problem, and we talked about it, and I understand why you have sayings, and you were very kind to explain that to me this afternoon, because it does relieve some of the pressures on our most valuable sites. I understand that. One of the things that was raised, I think, certainly locally here, is unsocial behaviour. In both, it was actually local to Warfield and Wingfield, actually. I know that we've asked for a particular site to have gates on, and security, but I just wondered how you're going to tackle this, Stephen. Is this a growing problem? It does seem that there are sort of spots of growing problem. I wouldn't say it's all over the place, but is it something that you're thinking about, and how are you going to tackle it?
It's been part of our thinking and part of our work for decades. It will never change. It's sporadic. it changes as groups grow up, move on, things happen. So it's with us to stay as an issue. We have to draw a balance between what's genuinely antisocial behaviour and what is just a different use of a public space that we might not potentially understand. Certainly, I had my 50th birthday last week, and I'm finding it harder and harder to appreciate the things that are going on in the parks. But we provide parks for everyone, for families, for teenagers, for everyone. People need places to go and to congregate, but for that genuine antisocial behaviour that's effectively criminal behaviour and is properly affecting people's lives, then we will continue to work in a collaborative way as best we can, because it's a very thorny problem to solve. There's no one solution. There will be elements of, as I would call, target hardening, making it harder for groups to do whatever they're doing. That might be barriers. We've certainly got some of those piloted at the moment at Westmoreland Park, which are working well. With the SANGs, there's a inherent challenge in that those sites are designed to be provided for the public to use, and all the time that a member of the public might reasonably walk their dog, the SANGs should be available. So we can't just lock up all sites at 6 o'clock, because they need to be available. But we've got a really good working group. So we work with outreach, youth workers, we work with the community safety team within the borough, and we work across departments wherever we can, including with the police, to make sure if we've got a local flare-up that we do everything we can to send youth workers down and really understand the issues that are going on and try and solve them.
Okay, good. Thank you. Dorothy, have you got something about this particular item? Did you want to follow this on?
Yes, actually, it's Steve. When we're looking at, you brought up the 7,000 volunteers working with, and we're going to hear from one in a little while. It's not so much us, but getting the education out there. Because at the end of the day, it's the schools or the young persons. And as I explained to our prior speaker, we are getting out there talking, because it's, at the end of the day, do you think it's the PR we've got to be really more concentrating on? Because you brought up rhododendrons. Now, most people love rhododendrons, Windsor and all this area, not knowing how bad they are for the area. And did you get really bad when cutting back, commercial people saying, what are you doing? It's not like cutting down a tree, it's hedgerow as they see it. But do you think it's the PR we need to really concentrate on getting out there more so, and that the volunteers have their way of knowing things? Because one of the things I was doing this weekend was working with some volunteers, and I couldn't believe the amount of, you say butterflies, but ladybirds, substantial amount of ladybirds. Now, at the end of the day, it does come back down to one thing and one thing only. It's planning and our policies and how we go about it. And
Stephen, what do you think?
I do think at the end of the day, Steve, you and I would be agreeing. I wouldn't allow anything, but we have to. We just can't. But
okay, let Stephen reply.
Would you like to come?
So in terms of the key theme that you raised there about communicating with the public, then my answer is quite simply, and I say this to the teams all the time, we cannot do too much communication. I think particularly when we're dealing with something that generally has good news stories, generally has things to benefit people, then the message that I give the teams is more. You can't do too much in terms of trying to encourage engagement and understanding of the natural world. Whether we actually do enough of that, whether we should be doing even more, then I'm happy to keep exhorting the team to do more and more and more, because it's a really important point that's being raised, that people need to understand these areas and be part of the response that's being made.
I forgot my mic on. Thanks, Stephen. Michael Gabbido, please. Michael.
Thank you, Michael Bradable here. Thank you, Stephen. Great presentation. Thank you for everything that you guys are doing. I think we have a fantastic borough and very green indeed. So thank you. My question is, how do you work with, we live in the same environment. So how do you work with the likes of Bracknell Town and the parishes and all that to ensure that you are all working in the same direction and focused on the same sort of strategy and plans, but more importantly, following up from the earlier presentation from the Wildlife Trust, the idea of this connection and bringing wildlife back into the community or as close to the community as possible, and also not having pockets and islands, you know, of biodiversity everywhere.
That is a really important point. Thank you, Councillor. It's essentially just meetings, networking, communicating, sharing information. So we host and run a parish parks and public realm meeting, which all of the parishes are represented at. The council facilitates that meeting, and we share experience and information about all things related to open space areas. In terms of how we can help money flow from development to schemes that are run not just by the borough but other bodies, then we use those connections to make sure that Section 106 money is passed to the parish councils to do projects where that's appropriate in their areas, and that would apply to biodiversity as well. And we essentially just look to foster that communication and put the right people in touch. So my teams talk regularly, weekly, with the staff doing equivalent work on the ground in Bracknell Town Council, in Winkfield, in Warfield. We talk regularly, and we try where we can to bring it together with the borough's policies. So where we've got a tree strategy or the biodiversity action plan or the rights of way improvement plan, all of these documents that are the guides for how we're delivering open spaces are shared with and have shared actions with local parishes and other groups. So, you know, for instance, in our biodiversity action plan, we've got targets and actions that are monitored that the Warfield Environment Group that collaborate with us on, and their work is helping to drive the agreed actions that the Nature Partnership has put into the biodiversity action plan.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so. I'm assuming that then I'm almost thinking that somebody somewhere will own the responsibility of the entire, you know, the bigger picture, if you see what I mean, across the borough.
We all own the responsibility. That would be my answer to that. Every individual, every councillor, every body, every group, every business. That's my message, that we all own the responsibility for biodiversity and for climate change and for making improvements. So the council's role I see as trying our best to coordinate and harness and foster more of that sort of responsibility. But yeah, the buck stops with individuals and with businesses and with groups.
Thank you. Very good answer, by the way. Thank you.
Yes, brilliant answer. Well done. Thanks, Michael. Excuse me. Okay, so our third speaker, thank you very much, Stephen, by the way.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your time and thanks for all the effort, and thanks for the cruise. We just move on to the third speaker, which is Des Sussex from the Crown Estate. We welcome to Des. Hi, Des, can see you now.
Hello.
Welcome. Des, it's really interesting because I think we were talking earlier about the public. I think Dorothy raised that point, because I can always remember the oak trees in the Great Park, and I can remember the Ferrari when they were starting to be cut down and people went bananas. Anyway, just a thought. I'll leave it to you, Des.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
I can. We can.
Good. Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me along. Just as a very brief introduction, I moved into Bracknell Forest to Bracknell in 1990 to join your Countryside Ranger team, where I had 11 very happy years working as a Countryside Ranger. So that was great. So I'm going to be speaking to you partly tonight as still a local resident and someone who's stayed here because I enjoy living here. And my main reason for moving here was because I knew a lot of the wildlife in the area. And Secondly, I am now, for my sins, the Biodiversity and Conservation Manager for the Crown Estates, based at Windsor Great Park. So the first part of my talk, I'll focus a bit on the borough, and hopefully reinforce some of the things that have already been said and bring in a few more points. And then I'll focus for the second part of my talk on some of the things we're doing within the Crown Estate, and you'll appreciate a large part of our land holding is within the borough. Just to kick off and to build on Stephen's contribution, when I worked as a ranger, some of the most enjoyable experiences were working with the local community, and that varied from working with local wildlife experts to just everyday local residents who wanted to help. And having a big enough team of rangers to harness that energy and enthusiasm, and also to tap into that local expertise, it's really great that the council is still funding and resourcing a countryside team. And I would say you get what you pay for, and if you can find it somehow to increase the rangers, then they'll have so much more capacity to do that education and outreach with schools, to foster long-term relationships with local community groups and their local sites, and to build up that network. And Matthew at the start talked about joining up all the habitats. If we can join up people and help them to join up the habitats, it's just got to be a win-win for everyone. And the rangers, I know there are other groups that can do some of this work, but the rangers, with their expertise and their status, I do think that certainly when I worked for the council, I know it's still the case now, local community groups do look to groups like the Countryside Service in the council and the rangers for leadership and inspiration, and to provide obviously a lot of the resourcing, the tools, the equipment, the sites to work on. So it's a really great resource to have within the council, the countryside team. And also, I'm sure I'll mention her again, but people up Marlies in the ecology, just forging those links with different departments, whether it was planning or highways, again, joining up across departments. And as we've just heard, joining up between the borough and the parishes and the town councils, making those connections. So I've lived here a long while now, over 30 years, and I would still be really enthusiastic to say Bracknell is an incredibly diverse borough for nature and wildlife. I'm going to try and use those words, wildlife and nature, a bit more than biodiversity. I think they're a lot more user-friendly and accessible, and biodiversity always sounds such a sort of scientific phrase, but there are really important habitats and some really rare species present, as well as everyday habitats and common species. And the comments from, I think it was Councillor Leake, about these developers saying, oh, those things are common and they can live somewhere else. One of our challenges is to actually make sure that common things remain common. We've just recently seen a bird called the house martin added to the red list of birds of conservation concern. It's heartbreaking to think that birds and wildlife that really are our bread and butter species, our everyday so-called common species, are in such decline that they're now put on sort of crisis lists. So the council's got a really important job. There are lots of really great habitats and wildlife still present in the borough. There couldn't be so much more, and there will be so much more with the energy and effort from people like yourselves backing it. So some of the reasons that habitats have survived are clearly because they've had legally protected status, such as the SSSIs, and Bracknell Forest has got quite a high percentage of its land cover designated by protected sites, which is great. I know some people see that as an asset and some people see it as a nuisance, but I certainly see it as something to be proud of and to crow about, but we need more, and we need those to act as the sort of reservoirs from which wildlife can spill out into the rest of the borough. Some of the other habitats include very ancient sites, such as some of the ancient woodlands. An ancient woodland is termed as a woodland that's been in place for at least 400 years. So these are sites that have remained, they've sort of survived whatever people and climate have thrown at them so far, and let's hope they can keep going into the future. We also have places like Shepherd Meadows along the River Blackwater in Sandhurst that are ancient grasslands and other ancient habitats that have survived. And I think where we know there are ancient habitats present, they must be seen as the jewels in our sort of crown, and they must be protected as much as we can through the planning policies and through positive management. I know that the SSIs and system, I think they're used to be called wildlife heritage sites, receive endorsement through the local plan to be given a level of protection. And with planning policies like biodiversity net gain, hopefully those sites can not only be preserved but increased and expanded on. Some sites that are protected are not always in great shape. So Wickery Copse, which was just along Peacock Lane to the west of Bracknell, Wickery Copse was an SSSI in the former Peacock Farm, and it was in a shocking state. It was basically being fly grazed by ponies most of the time, which were chewing all the bark on the trees, eating every flower in sight and wrecking it. So even though it was an SSI, it was in a poor condition. It's somewhat ironic that when the housing development in that area, Jennetts Park, came along, Wickery Copse needed to be protected, but the council's rather innovative and inspiring design around the copse provided a really nice green buffer strip around the copse, put in some protection for the copse with a boardwalk through it to sort of control public access. And the copse now is really thriving again. It's been one of those sites that's just been a joy to see it restored during a relatively brief span of time through both good leadership from the council and good work with the partners that you worked with on that. Caesar's Camp Heathland, another one, back in the 1990s, early 90s, it was in a rather poor state, both as a scheduled monument, and it was covered in a coniferous pine plantation. And Berkshire County Council in those days came in and helped to do some restoration to restore both the monument with its wonderful ramparts, but also to put in some rare habitat, the heathland. And now with the council's rangers and all of the volunteers and partners they work with, the heathland is now supporting rare species, butterflies, reptiles, birds that 30 years ago would have just been unheard of there. And the scheduled monuments looking fantastic as well. And I know it's not a finished job, it just needs yearly, almost weekly care and maintenance. With the amount of pressure from recreational pressure up there, it could soon go pear-shaped if it wasn't for the work of the council. And then, so there's a couple of restored sites, and then there's sites that have been created from scratch, like Horseshoe Lake. Sorry, I've got some pretty pictures coming up in a moment, by the way, but sites like Horseshoe Lake, obviously it was a restored gravel pit, but the meadowland and scrubland at either end of the lake has turned into wonderful habitats. The lake itself is an amazing place for water birds. The island was restored last year and has become a superb place for some quite rare birds. And in amongst that, it's a wonderful place for people to go, both to walk around the lake, to enjoy. Some people are now doing wild swimming and non-motorised water sports. And it's a great place where we've seen the effort and vision that's been put into the management of that site, creating a place for people and wildlife for all sorts of objectives. Long may it continue. Other sites that have been created that I've just plucked out of the air, there are many of these. Peacock Meadows used to be a just regulation farmland, now wonderful wildflower meadows. We can bring wildlife back. You put the meadows back, and I've been up there and seen butterflies I would have never dreamed of seeing in that place 20 years ago. And now the meadows are teeming with them. And again, through carefully mown paths, people out there enjoying them as well. Butler's Forest is the most recent one that I've enjoyed. I live down in Sandhurst, and it's just up in Crowthorne. I know it's been created as a sang, but we talk about connectivity. It's just over the road from the Crowthorne Woods. It's not far from the Wildmoor Heath. And it's another one of these part of the nature recovery network that you're building and creating in the borough, if you like. So I've seen the wildlife return, and it's hugely exciting and rewarding. And that's both for the visions of the people who've been involved, many of whom might have been volunteers. And I know many of the volunteers, they come out, and if the council, through its staff and councillors and other departments, particularly getting those school children out that we've heard, if you can show them what can be achieved, it just acts as inspiration for more to be done. Can we have the next slide, please? It all needs management, as I've mentioned before. So it's great that Bracknell Forest Council backs nature through much of its policies, funding and work. But I think it was already said, what a small team, the Countryside team, perhaps compared to some of the other departments. So anything you can do to boost that team, I'm sure it will reap rewards manifold, both through the quality of the countryside that you'll be maintaining, but also through the numbers of people that will be benefiting, whether it's through engagement in those sites or just enjoyment of them. And always hold this, is the wildlife and are these sites in good shape because of us or in spite of us? And I hope that you can always proudly say that's there because of us, and make sure that's underpins what we're trying to crow about. I've already said enough about the rangers. They're doing a great job, but it's not just about the council's land. I think all landowners need to be contributing, whether it's someone having a bee-friendly window box in an upstairs flat, to someone like the Crown Estate who own large areas of forestry. Everyone's got their role to play. And again, I think that's something the messaging can be made. Last year, Marlies invited me to help judge the Wildlife Gardening Awards. And I thought, what a great idea. And I wish I'd entered it, but I probably wouldn't have been allowed to judge then. But just having little things like that going on, perhaps you could even have, what's the best wildlife street or the best wildlife verge? Get people showing a bit of ownership of their responsibilities for wildlife. There were some really great wildlife gardens that we judged last year, and hopefully that sort of project can be continued. With such a highly pressured local area, with the pressures for house building we've heard of, huge local population, pressures on our roads and all of the services, we do know, and Stephen touched on this, that recreational opportunities in green spaces is one of the biggest ecosystem services that the countryside can offer. But recreational pressure does sometimes come at a cost, and the huge volume of visitors to our sites does put tremendous pressure both on the infrastructure and on the wildlife and habitats that use them. One of my local sites, Wildmoor Heath, is a SSSI nature reserve, and it's had an enormous number of new paths created across valuable heathland over the years, and it's a never-ending task for both Beebout and Bracknell's rangers to try and manage that site to achieve its best for nature while still being a friendly, welcoming place for visitors to enjoy. So please don't underestimate the resource that's needed just to keep maintaining these sites and their wildlife in good shape. and accommodate that increasing number of visitors. So we do know that ecosystem services are one of the vital things we need to start promoting more, and we do need to make sure that our management, the visitors, aren't sort of killing the golden goose, as it were. So, as I mentioned, from the very large SSIs like Swinley Forest or Windsor Great Park, right down to road verges and wildlife gardens, and even individual street trees, bug hotels that children might have put up at school, and bat boxes, they're all going to play their part in nature's recovery. And the council, I think, by providing that sort of mechanism to have join up, whether it's within the council or with external groups, can play a really great role in that. A good example of join up might just be started with the road verges, because when I worked for the council, I'm sure things have changed a lot now, but we did the council rangers, we did our countryside bit, and landscape and highways did their bits, and they did the road verges. We now know that many road verges could be managed a little bit better, sometimes a lot cheaper, and achieve more for wildlife. Obviously, the health and safety and the maintenance of safe road traffic needs to be the priority, but do invest time looking at where have you already got good road verges. Now, some road verges will just be stinging nettles or weeds, and in those cases, they may need a look at, can we do something better here? But some verges still retain all sorts of wildflowers and habitats that are worth making the most of, just perhaps through a slight tweak. Maybe instead of mowing them once a month, mow them just a couple of times a year at strategic times. Or we're looking at this with our own mowing regimes over at Windsor at the minute. Can we actually keep the place tidy? I hate that word tidy, by the way, but can we keep it presentable, well maintained, safe and appropriate for purpose, whilst actually making a lot more of the wildflowers and wildlife that's in there? I'm going to talk a bit about ancient trees when I talk about our land at Windsor, but the first ancient trees I came across in Bracknell were in Pope's Meadow. I hope you've all been to Pope's Meadow. If you haven't been there, shame on you, and do go and pay a visit there. Pope's Meadow, just near the car park, are some of the most special trees in Bracknell, some wonderful ancient oak pollards, possibly boundary trees. And within the actual parkland itself, it's a lovely parkland landscape. Now, I think the ancient open-grown trees, especially English oaks, are probably the highest value features in Bracknell Council, and they are an important link to the ancient Windsor Forest, which would have extended far from Windsor across Bracknell and beyond. When I say open-grown trees, some of our trees in Windsor and some of those trees at Pope's Meadow and a number of other of your parks, some of them are 500 plus years old, and they've become very old because they've had space to grow large. When we do tree planting, there's a real rush to plant trees now, especially for carbon. But when we plant lots of trees close together, you might get a copse or a woodland, but you won't necessarily get those open grown trees that are still going to be there in 500 or dare I suggest 1,000 years time. So there are spaces in some of your parks where you can create new woodlands and hedgerows and copses, and there are also places where perhaps it's appropriate to try and grow some of the open grown trees. And I think it was Councillor Virgo at the beginning said something about how much oxygen a large tree provides to help us breathe. So woodlands and hedges can do that as well, but please do value open grown trees. And many of them are not just in nice places. Many of them, well, all of Bracknell's nice, isn't it? But many of them are not just in our parks and countryside places. Some of them are in street trees or on roundabouts and places like that. They all need care and attention, and we need to make sure they're still here in many years' time. And next slide, please. So I'll talk a bit about some of our work at Windsor now. I know I'm racing through, sorry, next slide, please. So the Crown Estate, the lines on the maps there show the boundary of the Crown Estate ownership. So you can see there's a large chunk of Bracknell Forest, particularly Swinley Forest, Buttersteep, Swinley Park, and parts of Windsor Great Park and Forest. A large chunk of that is designated as SSI and European sites, special area of conservation and the special protection area. And most of it is strictly protected under the Crown Estate Act to be maintained in its character as a royal park and forest. Now we're trying to maintain it in various ways, and I'll speak some more on that in a moment. The next slide, please. Our vision at Windsor is to make sure that we are a leading rural estate in our work for the Crown Estate in managing this estate. We want it to be a centre of excellence for both environment and ecological best practice, and a place that we can invite people to come and see what we're doing and be proud of showing off what we're doing. As well as the habitats, increasingly we're now looking at things like our own carbon footprints and sustainable use of water and all sorts of other types of environmental issues that are coming to the fore. We know, like yourselves, we know that many of our areas are under severe pressure for public access, an increasing demand for public access. We're trying to balance that with managing some of UK and Europe's most important sites, which is quite a challenge. We've got a net zero ambition for 2030 within the Crown Estate. And next slide, please. So I mentioned that the ancient oak trees are so important. We're blessed with a large number of them at Windsor. Every single one of them is an absolute treasure and a real important asset to be maintained. We did lose some in the recent storm Eunice, but we're doing our best to try and make sure that all of those trees are in well-maintained landscapes. I didn't quite catch your mowing under tree canopies sort of concept, but we're looking at what happens around our important trees and are we actually protecting their root zones? Because the bit above the ground is nice to see, but the bit below the ground is so important. And in many cases, we've been damaging those root zones over the years, and we're trying to reverse that now and make sure that the trees are getting the best possible chance to survive for many, many more centuries. Next slide, please. So some of the trees occur in open parkland, farmland. Here's some in the deer park. The blossom trees in there, important for lots of wildlife as well, both of the blossoms. We hear a lot about nectar, pollen and nectar, and most trees that provide pollen and nectar then provide nuts or berries or fruits later in the year, so they're important for the food chains. And you can see the dead tree in the front of the picture there. That's a dead tree full of life, absolutely full of living organisms, insects and invertebrates, fungi, and wherever we can, where it's safe, we keep our dead trees. Now, some of your street trees, just near where I live in Sandhurst, some of them where they've had to be taken down for safety reasons, but you've left the stumps. I know that those stumps stay alive, and they're some of the best habitats for stag beetles and all sorts of other bugs. So do cherish your street trees, and even if they have to be reduced or come down, the stumps in the ground are still a valuable habitat for many years. Next slide, please. So we've got lots of tree planting going on, both in the open park and down at the bottom. We're doing a large tree planting program around the farms, where we've got there you've got a shelter belt being established. We've planted, I think, about 4.5 kilometres of hedges this winter. So we've got a really ambitious tree planting program, and occasionally we're doing really special planting. So the top right-hand corner, that's Offers Oak. We think that oak might have been a baby in the reign of King Offa 1300 years ago, and we took a graft from that tree, and the little one in the cage at the front is baby Offa, which we hope will live as long as its parent. Next slide, please. We've got some conservation grazing. We're using longhorn cows, and we're hoping to do a bit more of that. I know that the council at some of its sites has some conservation grazing. It's another of those things that you have to invest in your communication to your visitors and your taxpayers. Why have you got cows wandering around in the site? But I think if they're well managed, they enhance the visitor experience and the habitats. So I like to try and champion conservation grazing where we can. Next slide, please. Windsor's a nationally important place for fungi. Each autumn we get plagues of people coming to try and collect them and pick them, mostly for commercial reasons. If it was just the people picking the odd one or two for their breakfast, I think that would be different, but we have a lot of pressure. So we have to have our own team of rangers and wardens trying to help to maintain the sites. So there's a variety of different fungi there. Next slide, please. We've also got some very rare species. So down at the bottom right-hand corner is the stag beetle, which some of you may have seen. It's fairly common locally, but please don't take it for granted. It's nationally an important species, and we benefit from good populations because we've got good populations of old trees, well-managed trees in gardens and parks. So don't take it for granted. It's a real special. The other two insects on the page, the violet click beetle, is only found in 3 places in Britain, and the royal splinter cranefly, which is found at Windsor, is only known from one other place in Europe so far. Now that might be because there's hardly anyone out there able to identify it, but we do think it is a very rare species. So just on the doorstep of Bracknell, you've got species that are really, really rare and in the borough. Some of the rare species that, like the heart moth, which we have in Windsor Forest, has been found in 1 or 2 of your sites that have got ancient oaks. So when you start looking, who knows what you're sitting on? So important to maintain it. Next slide, please. I'm nearly finished. We're trying to restore some areas to habitat. So here's another heathland restoration area. This is within our Buttersteep Forest, just over between Bracknell and Ascot. Next slide, please. And that habitat can support these sorts of birds that are very important. You have them at your own Wildmoor Heath Nature Reserve, and we have some of them in Swinley Forest and Swinley Park. Very rare birds, fairly, I won't say abundant, but they're doing fairly well locally. But again, they're species that are really, we should really treasure them. We mustn't take them for granted. Next slide, please. And we've been doing lots and lots of pond creation, and I know the council's been doing some as well. We've created quite a lot of ponds in Crowthorne Woods, lots in Windsor Great Park, and we've had a few created in Buttersteep and Swinley Park in the last winter. What we do find, one of our issues is that some of the ponds immediately get adopted as dog swimming pools, which absolutely wrecks them as a habitat. So we're identifying that some ponds probably either need to be tucked out the way where no one knows where they are, or fenced off. But I think we're lucky we've got enough space that we can maybe leave 1 or 2 ponds as for the dog owners to enjoy, and try and keep some for the wildlife as well. Just shows the pressure that lands on around here. Next slide, please. One of the reasons that ponds are so important is the Bracknell area is nationally important for some wetland insects, particularly dragonflies and damselflies. And there's 2 species on the page there, the small red damselfly and the keeled skimmer, that thrive at places like Wildmoor Heath and occasional place like Englemere Pond. They like the sort of heathy pools and ponds and lots of mossy habitats. So we we almost have a duty to try and increase their numbers because we're sitting on a nationally important populations, and through a bit of creative management that can be done. And I know that the council and BBOUT have been doing some wetland enhancements at Wildmoor Heath and some of your other nature reserves. So long may it continue. I'm sorry if I've overrun my time, but I think you'll be glad to know that's the last of my slides.
There's undisputed enthusiasm that you have and elude, and you know, thank you so much for all the work and stuff. Just one thing I would like to ask, actually. I've never quite understood, you know, ivy grows up trees. I've always cut it down because it's like it's going to strangle the tree. Is that correct?
Ivy can be a nuisance on some trees, and where a lot of trees drop their leaves, if ivy is infesting the upper branches of a trees, it's evergreen and it'll act as a sail in the winter and make the tree a bit more vulnerable to blowing over. But and ivy can, if it really smothers a tree, it can sometimes affect the tree. But ivy is also a massively important wildlife plant. In the autumn, ivy is probably the most important nectar source, pollen and nectar source for insects in late autumn. So where it can be retained, keep it. But I think on some specimen trees and in some locations, it's not the end of the world to cut it down. But yeah.
All right, thanks. Sandra.
Okay, thank you. Oh, that was such a good presentation. Thank you, Des. It was so detailed that I didn't think I wanted to ask anything. But then I just thought I'd just take the opportunity while you're here. I mean, Crown Estate, so you represent the Crown Estate. And of course, everybody largely knows of Swinley Forest, the famous, you know, the well-known areas. And we've spoken this evening about the increasing demand for public access. I just wanted to ask that question. Is all the Crown Estate in our borough open to the public, all of it? Or do you have like hidden away places that actually people don't have access to?
A large chunk of it in Bracknell is, but no, there are some parts that don't have open public access. I think, without having the map of the borough in front of me, there are some parts of Windsor Forest which have restricted public access, and that's just restricted to local residents who live within, I think, I can't remember if it's a mile or a kilometre of the gate. So, and there's bits in the Buttersteep Forest, the Swinley Brick Pits, which is fenced off and doesn't have public access. That's partly because it's an SSI, but it's actually also quite a dangerous, hazardous site. It's former old brick workings, and there's quite a lot of hazards in there. So there's mixed reasons why we've kept that fenced off. But the larger part of it is accessible. Some parts of it, like Swinley Park now and Buttersteep, we've got members only car parks where you can people can pay an annual membership fee. That's for car parking to get them, but if you can get there by other means, they're accessible for people to walk into. So people walk into Buttersteep from North Ascot or South Ascot, sorry, and people can walk into Swinley Park from Martin's Heron easily. So the larger proportion is accessible, but not all of it.
Not all of it. Okay, great.
It is, of course, a commercial operation as well, isn't it? So we should say that. Thanks, Sandra. Dorothy.
Yes, it carries on from there. Des, it's nice to see someone that's been around as long as I have, and particularly with Buttersteep. And it's also a pleasure to say the word Bracknell Forest, because that's where we are. And do you not think it's important we get the message out there? After Sandra said what she did, that we work with the Crown, yourselves, to make people aware or put together some sort of paperwork, because let's take it where we have Lapland. We could have ended up with houses on there.
Yes.
And what is retained now is the bog. And it is something, is it important that we do get out there with Buttersteep and the rest of it, some form of map that we show what is liable, viable, or whatever, because that is the important part. People not taking into consideration, oh, we can do this, we can do that. We could have ended up with 700 houses on the bog.
Yes. Yes. Our land, our forestry land is obviously a commercial part of our portfolio, and we have various activities that go on there. Most of that can accommodate public access a lot of the time. Occasionally we have closures and restrictions, but we're just in the process of looking at our website and our own communications, and I think my colleagues would be very keen to work with Bracknell to make sure that appropriate messaging is got out there. We work with the council already. Certainly Stephen and the team at the Lookout work with some of my colleagues. We've also got a relationship with BBOUT to staff our education centre over at Windsor Great Park to host mainly primary school groups. So building up these relationships and making sure we're not missing opportunities for the right messaging is something I think myself and colleagues would certainly want to work with you on.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Messaging is always the answer to everything, it seems.
Communication.
Communication. Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Dorothy. And thank you, Des, for your efforts, and thanks for the presentation. Very, very, very good.
You're welcome. Sorry if I overran a bit.
No, it's all right. Don't worry, don't worry. It's very interesting, to be honest. Okay, going on to the last speaker, Sheila Collins, welcome. And really kind of works quite well because we're now looking, Sheila, at kind of a local feel of all this in Warfield. So welcome, and the floor is yours, Sheila. Sorry, it's a bit later than we said.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to try and share my screen now. I've not done this before, so hopefully it will be successful.
It is successful.
Thank you. As you can see, I am founding member of Warfield Environment Group and the current vice chair. We were formed in 2002 by a Bracknell Forest Council initiative. We were given £200 and some litter pickers from Bracknell Forest Council, and off we went, and 20 years later we're still here. This is our first ever event. We said we were a group of residents who care about the local environment and want to help improve it. So we have always worked very closely with the Bracknell Forest Council Rangers and the Biodiversity Officer. And these are the original projects and activities we worked on. I'm not going to read through them all, but most of them we continue with today. You'll see that we have done rhododendron clearance in Hayley Greenwood, which has already been mentioned. We do tree and hedge planting, and also we started with the Woodland Trust Ancient Tree Hunt in order to record trees in Warfield and to try and afford them a little bit more protection. And when the Bracknell Forest Veteran Tree Survey group was set up, we moved into, we joined that, and we've surveyed 160 trees in Warfield, which are recorded in the Thames Valley Environmental Record Centre database. I think it was Stephen who mentioned that. The Bracknell Forest Biodiversity Action Plan has also been mentioned, so I won't say too much about it other than to say that I think the first one was published in 2012, 10 years after WEG was formed. We updated our aim at that point to protecting and enhancing the local environment and so increasing biodiversity in Warfield, which was the first time that biodiversity was actually mentioned, although it was inferred in all of our activities. This is a fantastic initiative by Bracknell Forest Council, the Bracknell Forest Nature Partnership. It's hosted by the Bracknell Forest Council Biodiversity Officer, and it allows all the local groups in the area who have interest in the environment, and including the parish councils and town councils, to meet to discuss and share ideas and get involved. And it also helps to deliver the objectives and targets of the current Biodiversity Action Plan. And the group itself, the partners of the group, had input into the current Biodiversity Action Plan. It enables the partners to share knowledge and expertise. One thing I would say, we used to have representation from the rangers, but we don't seem to at the moment. I know they're very busy, but I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity. I would love to see a ranger back at this group. It would enable some of the things that the rangers do to be highlighted. I think I'm trying to think of examples. Surveys are very important to make sure we're recording wildlife populations so we can track changes and make sure we're not losing wildlife. And it was only through the Town and Country that I learned that Bracknell Forest Council are monitoring populations in parks and open spaces, but with very little more detail. I think you'll find that some of the wildlife groups in the area are also doing this, and I just have a bit of concern that we may be repeating ourselves or recording data in different places, and we're not working together quite as effectively as we could. Another issue we have is the plastic tree guard debate. Trees are planted with guards, they need them, but an awful lot of tree planting has taken place. And unfortunately, these degrade in the sun. And we've got a lot of plastic shards now at some of the green spaces certainly in Warfield. And it would help to have a discussion with the rangers as to their views and what might be done better and used in the future. Des mentioned the gardens competition, which was part of a year of the gardens a couple of years ago. This year, the Nature Partnerships has decided to have a year of the green corridors, which have already been mentioned as particularly important for wildlife. Well, not only wildlife, but people as well. So we're looking at trees, shrubs, hedges, rivers that provide passage for wildlife between bigger green spaces, but they also have the benefit of, they benefit our mental and physical well-being, which is also important. They are, the activities are designed to achieve some of the targets in the BAP, and WEG events and our Verge project form part of this initiative, as well as lots of events from other partner organisations. And there is a web page on the Bracknell Forest Council website and a list of all the events that are appropriate to this initiative in covering the whole of Bracknell Forest. I'm just going to take a quick look at a couple of our new projects. Again, we've mentioned verge management. And in 2021, last year, we agreed to, well, we were looking to manage one verge in the Whitegrove area of Warfield for wildlife. In the end, we've ended up with 3, and I must admit, it has been quite hard work. It's supporting one of the BAP targets, which is good. We surveyed to see what was already there. And this March, we have oversown with a native wildflower mix, which was suggested by the biodiversity officer. And the cutting regime has been reduced down to an annual mow. We also discovered on one of these verges that we had some very young wild service trees growing. They grow as suckers from mature trees. These are a BAP priority species representing woodland habitat. And so we've done additional work, and I think you can just see them in the photo at the bottom, to build dead hedge fences around them to protect them until they've grown a bit larger. And then we will select 2 to grow on to mature trees. No mow isn't always very popular with the public. We were a little concerned we might get some abuse, because we do sometimes get abuse for the work we do. And I think that highlights the need to educate. We try and do that. We're actually getting some of these B signs from Bracknell Forest Council for our 3 verges, which is great. And we intend to put small notices up as well to explain what we're doing. We also use our website and social media to try and educate people about the benefits of leaving the grass to grow. I think one of my comments is I find it disappointing when I'm near the new developments in Warfield that the verges around them are mown extremely short. And I think really going forward, we perhaps need to address that too, perhaps at the planning stage. Another of our new projects is maintaining the orchards in Warfield, because they are very beneficial for wildlife and obviously for us as well. We have a large community orchard of more than 100 trees at Larks Hill. I don't know whether some of you will know it, but it has been a little neglected of late. So we had a couple of years ago, a group of us did some training in orchard pruning, and then we started work at Larks Hill Orchard. But with the number of trees, it really was a little bit too much for us. We managed to prune 19 trees, and obviously that leaves a lot to go. So this year we've got members who are very enthusiastic. So we held work parties at 2 of our smaller orchards in Edmonds Green and at Warfield Chase, just to ensure that they don't get us out of control. We hope to return to the Larks Hill Orchard next year, but hope to work as part of a team rather than just as a group on our own. I think I should say about orchards that it seems to be becoming more popular to plant orchards as part of new development proposals, but we really need to make sure that the maintenance of them is properly planned and funded to provide a really worthwhile facility for new residents that we are obviously going to get. I'm just going to talk a little bit about threats to biodiversity. I think it's mainly us. Obviously, green spaces are great for people, and I would hate to not have them, but we have to be aware that of the damage that some people cause. Just some examples that are obvious at the moment. Bluebells, obviously they're coming out and they look beautiful, but they can be very damaged by people trampling over them, and they often don't recover. This photograph was taken last week at Long Copse, which is attached to Cabbage Hill in Warfield, and you can see the damage that's been done. I've seen notices have been installed, certainly in Whitegrove Copse, to ask people not to do this. But I think it's education, really. It's always down to education. We need to make sure that people are aware of the damage they're doing. The other one, which is a bit of a bugbear of mine, is skylarks and the dangers to them. We have a lot of skylarks in the north of Warfield. They are red listed birds, which means they're very high conservation status. And they're also ground nesting, and they're a BAP priority species. The public green spaces we provide are supposed to take visitors away from the Thames Basin Heath SSI. But unfortunately, dogs roaming freely in these open spaces, especially now when the birds are nesting, I feel is going to really damage them. Again, Bracknell Forest Council have installed notices, but certainly at Frost Folly, these are largely ignored. We have a green space called Larks Hill, which has been established here for rather longer than Frost Folly. And it used to have skylarks, but now you don't hear any at all. And there is concern that this will happen at Frost Folly too. My biggest concern that there was no acknowledgement of red-listed birds in a recent SANG planning application. And I'd like to have discussions about how that can be changed in the future. I know we can't reject planning applications just because of an endangered bird, but it would be nice to at least consider some sort of protection for them in the planning process. I'm going to finish here. I think my summary is, I hope I've given you a flavour of what Warfield Environment Group is doing. Good things are happening in Bracknell, I feel, regarding biodiversity. We have more environment groups now than when WEG started 20 years ago. We have a lot, including Binfield Environment Group, which WEG provided advice to when the group was formed. Priestwood Environment Group is the newest one and has just been formed by a WEG member. We're doing lots of things, as I say, but I still think we've got a lot more to do. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have learnt something from my talk.
Thank you, Sheila, very, very much. And it's great to see the local side of it, I think, to everyone. Couple of questions. Let's go to Sandra. Sandra, you have a question.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As a local councillor, I just wanted to say, and actually to thank Sheila for the work that she does on the Warfield Environment Group. It's a fabulous group. It does a lot of good work. My question was really, is Stephen still with us? Stephen? I don't know if he's still with us, Chair. Let me just go to a different view. Oh, there he is. My question actually was, Stephen, can we, as a council, help the Warfield Environment Group with the maintenance of the orchard?
I think he's already said, actually, well, I'm speaking for you, Stephen, but you will support it. But you better say those words yourself.
Yeah, it's not my patch, but, you know, it just seems like an ideal,
Steve.
yeah.
Yeah, if now's the time for me to come in, I really enjoyed the presentation and would echo those thoughts that there's some really great work being done by Sheila and the group. And I know I have to apologise that you've all got me here tonight because it was supposed to be Marlies, our biodiversity officer, but she's having a second baby, and I'm a poor substitute for Marlies when it comes to biodiversity. But ultimately, I've been taking some notes of the things that Sheila was saying. I'm very happy to support the relevant rangers being better connected into the work that you're doing. In addition to Marlies, we had been focusing Marlies as the main resource that would provide that link, but we can certainly expand that to the relevant rangers, and I think that would be a beneficial thing two ways. In terms of the orchards and the sort of education work and the other projects that you picked up, a number of ideas sprang to mind where we could work differently. In terms of the verges and the orchards and how we would fund and plan for that with developers, I think that will tie into biodiversity net gain, and it will be important to make sure that we are picking projects that really suit us, to make sure that that money that comes from developments where they simply can't provide for the biodiversity on their sites and they're having to make contributions off-site, the onus will be on us collectively to make sure that we've identified those local projects. And things like an orchard could be created in the right spot that suits local people. It could come with it'd be a modest endowment of money that will help fund that work going forward. And it will be the same for things like highway verges and other green connection works that we can do. I think that might be the way that things can be done better in future, because I share those concerns that at the moment the rubber stamp of landscaping that gets put on a development sometimes does have lots of short grass, and I'm hoping that this desire to get biodiversity credits will actually change the incentive of what the developers are designing for, and we might actually find that they're designing with wild verges in order to get the credits on their site, and it might actually prompt them to be thinking in the way that we really want them to be thinking about anyway. And then in terms of the education points of view that Sheila raised, I think they're very valid, and I just made a note that we could do with an annual programme of warnings and educational things that we do almost on a seasonal basis. We know when the bluebells are coming out. We know we need to try and reach as many people as possible to preserve them and not walk through them. And similarly with skylarks and nesting and all of those things, then I think there's a real value to collaborating on how those messages go out. So yeah, thank you for the talk. Have I picked up what I was being asked to? I'm not sure.
Sheila.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to the signage. I don't think just signage is necessarily reaching the people it needs to reach. I was up at Frost Folly at the weekend, and people aren't looking in the notice board. Not everybody's interested in what's in the notice board. They reach the top of the car park, let the dog off the lead, and off it goes. So I think I think the signage is good, but I think we need to look at other ways of reaching people as well.
Yeah, I was thinking a coordinated approach across all our channels, because you never reach everybody with one methodology. You need to reach some people via their phone, because if it's not on their phone, they won't read it. You need to reach other people by something paper through the door. So it might be that our Town and Country magazine or something will help. Other people just need to speak to somebody on site perhaps, but the more we can get the message out through every channel, the better the hope will reach every person.
Okay, good.
Dorothy. I was going to say that because Sheila, I'm sure as a councillor on the parish, you will be able to put the message over through that's where you should be coming through. Because also I'm fully aware that you work with a group that I am very involved with, is the Wildlife of Ascot, with Malcolm and the rest of it. Yes, I am very involved with them. And it's important, it's educating. It's not saying you will, it's get on board.
Yes.
And that is where you come in. because I was listening to what you said. Need to educate? Yes, it is. You're on the parish, get that through. I know the borough have helped you financially as well, your group. Let's get it out there. It's not dictating, it's educating.
Mm-hmm. And we do try and do that as much as we can on our social media channels. So, you know, if you want to follow us, do.
No, I don't need to follow. I actually work with the Wildlife of Ascot, and that's where it came in. That's why I wish I'd seen your paperwork to begin with in advance. But having said that, I am going to follow up with what you've put before us and be prepared. I will be asking questions of what you stated is not put out there. Okay, thank you. And I successfully say it's nice to see volunteers in all parties working together on it, because
to take up Dorothy's point,
you are doing well with the voluntary sector.
I think it's from this evening. What's great about Bracknell, to be honest, is that we're all talking to each other, and we're all working together. It takes time, but it is happening. And I would leave one point, because everybody can have a pond in their garden. Well, they have a garden clearly, but you know, ponds help tremendously, and a little bit of wild garden left for the biodiversity is also something else. Sheila, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Very grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that wraps up this evening. I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is, I know Councillor Temperton has actually replied to me and suggested a session regarding smaller companies and their efforts to tackle climate change. So we'll have a think about that at some point. And also, I just wanted to say that I'd met someone for a later panel meeting about hydrogen with someone called Daniel Lee, represents one of our best companies that's developing other fuels like hydrogen, and it was an interesting discussion that we'll think of how to put that to the panel. So thank you very much. I'm sorry it's gone on a little bit. Dorothy, did you want to say something? Your hand is up.
Yes, having said that, at the next agenda setting, you brought up hydrogen. I think we've done that on other things, but
we're doing it in September.
I would, yes, but hopefully papers will be coming before people on the strategy for the environment and climate change, and I'm hoping that everyone will read those as well. But also anaerobic digester, verges, and all the rest of it. Please read them. If you have a problem, come to me or speak. Tony and I will talk with one another, but it's important we work together.
It is.
Together.
It is. I second that. And if anyone's got any ideas for future meetings, please send it to me or to Dorothy, and we can put it on the list for consideration. So thank you so much for everyone. Thanks for all the presenters who've done a sterling job. And let's all try and do something, because I know we're all out in the gardens at the moment doing our bit. So thank you very much. And the next meeting, I don't think we've actually settled on it, but it's about the 8th or 9th of June, but we'll let everybody know, of course. Okay,